Honda's contender to rebel the Royal Enfield legacy, the CB350 H'ness, has taken its own sweet time to come. But since its arrival, Honda doesn't want to waste any more time to add more vehicles on that platform to grab a larger slice of that pie. Now, whether or not that happens remains to be seen, but what that means for you and I is that we have more options to choose from. So, without further ado, this is the second variant atop the CB350 platform. It's called the CB350 RS. While the H'ness was benchmarked closely against the Royal Enfield Classic 350, the CB350 RS carves its own image, which does away with the old-school chrome for sportier matte blacks on the engine casing, exhaust system and the headlamp bezel. Then there is the silhouette inspired by the CB1000R, with a stubby tail and the upswept exhaust, making the RS appear sportier than the standard form of the CB350 H'ness. This isn't like what the Thruxton is to the Bonneville, it's more like what the Speed Twin is to the T120, or closer to the price bracket, it's more like what the 42 is to the standard Jawa. Speaking of which, there is now a new 42, a 2.1, if you're a nerd who likes code names. Design is a personal preference, of course, and both motorcycles look handsome in their own way. The RS goes with a relatively modern styling with the LED lamps all around and the semi-digital instrumentation. Jawa, on the other hand, sticks to its old-school charm, with some custom design elements like the offset analog instrumentation and the optional accessories like the fly screen and the headlight grille. The Jawa 42 2.1 is even sportier now with the blacked-out engine and exhaust, new color options that have better finish than before, complemented by a grey racing stripe with a matching grey switchgear, alloy wheels that are detailed with pinstriping, and an abstract Jawa badge placed on one of the spokes. We need to talk about the wheels and the tires. Because you have alloy wheels on the 2.1, you finally get tubeless tires on a Jawa. It sticks to the 18-17 configuration, whereas the RS now goes a size lower on the rear wheel. It's a 17-incher. But to make sure that the rolling circumference of the rear wheel stays the same, what they've done is gone with a narrower rim. So you can visually see the tire ballooning out a little bit. It sits a bit too closer to the chain guard, but the bigger problem is that around the bends it feels a little skittish. It feels, well, not as confidence-inspiring. And because they're still a little bit confused between this bike being meant for the road or even being a scrambler, they've gone with a block pattern for the tires. That makes the RS marginally better equipped for broken roads and gravelly or muddy pathways should you encounter them on your ride. But around the winding tarmac, the tires squirm and feel skittish. The Jawa, on the other hand, goes with slimmer rubber but handles equally well, if not better. But which of these motorcycles you will like around the winding roads will depend on what seating posture you like. The Jawa's rider triangle is exactly like the standard, meaning you will sit in a bit of a knees up, upright and relatively more foot forward position that gives you the sensation of riding atop the powertrain. In comparison, the CB350 RS with its slightly sportier lean-forward stance makes it a bit more accommodating for riders that are generously sized. I think since they were adding another variant to the lineup, Jawa should have taken this opportunity and created a more sportier riding stance for the 42 2.1. Now that limitation actually comes from the way the foot peg is mounted directly on the frame. That is why this riding posture stays common across all the Jawa models, Perak included. Whereas if you look at the RS, they have gone with a completely different foot peg stay, and that has allowed Honda to have a completely different riding posture and different ergonomics for the RS compared to the H'ness. The RS has moved the position of the rider foot pegs rearward by 112mm and upward by 12mm, whereas the handlebar sits 10mm higher and 41mm farther. What all these numbers translate into is a slightly more forward bias seating which imparts a higher sense of control. While the repositioned foot pegs don't scrape as often while cornering as the counterparts on the H'ness. On a similar note, all new Jawa models have a redesigned side stand for better cornering clearance. Since we are on the topic of ergonomics, let's also talk about the long-distance comfort. Now, both these motorcycles with their standard forms aren't exactly the best long-distance tourers that you can buy for your money, but at the same time, if you were to take them long distances, now I have done about 200 kilometers on each of the motorcycles on separate days. and I feel that the seating, the ergonomics of the RS are far more comfortable as compared to that of the 42 or any of the Jawas for that matter. Also, if you're going to be riding these motorcycles only in the city environment, you're not going to notice much of a difference in their overall comfort. The chassis is carried over unchanged, and the suspension setup of the RS isn't very different than the H'ness, meaning that the ride is supple and more comforting. In comparison, the Jawa feels stiffer. In a bid to avoid scraping the underbelly over speed humps, the suspension setup has been firmed up a bit, meaning you have to slow down for bad patches to avoid a bone-jarring ride. Like the chassis and the suspension, even the engine of the RS remains unchanged over the H'ness, which means the tuning is also exactly the same. Despite that, the performance figures are marginally, tiny bit better than the H'ness, and that's because this bike is 2 kilos lighter. The characteristics of the engine remain unchanged too. Its cruising sweet spot is between 100 to 110 km an hour, will go past 130 km an hour with some reluctance and clamor, has tall gearing which needs multiple gear shifts while riding at city speeds, and excellent fuel economy that you expect from a Honda. On a related note, you are likely to love the engine for its smooth performance and quick rev build-up. And though it isn't in the same ballpark as the 250cc street nakeds, the performance feels adequate for road use. While the tires and the rear-end design might make you think of the CB350 RS as a scrambler too, the engine lacks the low-end grunt and the suspension lacks the travel or softness that you would expect for scrambling. These two motorcycles are few of those modern retros which will make you smile no matter how you like to ride them. Slow and steady or fast and racy. But if it's the latter that you prefer, it is a Jawa 42 2.1 that has that sportier edge. Now, the engine was always excellent, but in the BS6 version, it's got even better because of what Jawa likes to call the cross-port technology for the cylinder heads. Essentially, what that means is that the flow of energy is a lot more efficient now. To that effect, even the header pipes now directly lead the exhaust gases to the canister via a catcon and not feed it to a collection chamber under the engine and then feed it separately to the exhaust system. So essentially, the flow of energy right from the engine all the way to the exhaust is much more efficient than before. So while the power has only increased marginally, the energy losses are lower and the performance gain is much higher. That makes it significantly quicker than the Honda and also gives it better tractability in the city. Fuel economy figures aren't too far behind either. Since dual channel ABS is now standard on the Jawa, the braking figures see an improvement too. Despite having larger brakes, the RS needs much longer stopping distances, slightly more than the H'ness even, and I would blame it on the tires. But the Honda has a better safety kit comprising of a switchable traction control system which, along with a slip and assist clutch, prevents sliding and hopping of the rear wheel. On that note, the clutch is also lighter than the Jawas, making it that much easier to live with in the city. At the time of this test, the Honda CB350 RS was about 14,000 rupees more expensive than the Jawa 42 2.1. But I think it is definitely more value for money. One is the safety features, then you get features like the hybrid instrumentation, the LED lighting, and then it also comes with all the Honda niceties. The reliable engine, the low cost of ownership, that build quality, all of that is really good. Now the Jawa 42, the 2.1, it's a good step up from the original, but I think in the company of competition that is bringing in more new age technology to the modern retro segment, I think it leaves you wanting for more. But if I wanted a motorcycle that has the good looks of a classic, but with the go and the eagerness of a modern engine, I think I would choose the Jawa. But at the end of the day, you have to consider all the things. You have to find out which is the better package. And when the points stack up on the points table, it is the CB350 RS, which is the clear winner of this test.